Okay, welcome everyone who's joined. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes here at our workshop. And while we're waiting, we encourage you to just let us know who you are in the participant list. If you want to hover over your screen, you'll see a little participant icon at the bottom. And if you click on that, you'll see the participant list and you can, put your name and affiliation, pronouns, however you like to be called by. So thanks, and we'll get started in a couple minutes. Welcome everyone, and we'll get started in just a couple of minutes here. A few folks are still joining, so appreciate your patience as you wait here. And if you have just joined, we encourage you to let us know who you are in the participant list. If you want to open that participant list and just find your name and indicate your name, affiliation, pronouns, or however you'd like to be identified. Thanks. All right, well, it's a little bit after 9 o'clock here, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. And I think the live stream has begun, so meeting will officially start. Okay, well, thank you everyone. Thank you everyone for joining the first of two workshops that we're calling Getting Us Out of a Jam. This is part of the Oregon Department of Transportation's effort to bring congestion pricing to I-5 and I-205. All right, well, it's a little bit after 9 o'clock here, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. And I think the live stream has begun, so meeting will officially start. Okay, well, thank you everyone. Thank you everyone. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. So thank you everyone for joining the first of two workshops as part of ODOT's effort to bring congestion pricing to I-5 and I-205 in the Portland metro area. And I am Sylvia Tuborowski, and I'll be helping to facilitate today's meeting. And in a moment, I'll hand it over to Lucinda, ODOT's Oregon Toll Program Director. But in the meantime, I just want to walk through a few of the tools and tips for today's meeting. So we're going to be using Zoom for today's meeting. And the first half of today's workshop is really going to be primarily panels and information so that you all have a level of knowledge about the project. And we'll also be having a number of interactive activities. And we'll ask that you stay on mute throughout this time, but please use your video so that we have more of that feeling like we're in the room together. And if you're familiar with Zoom, the mute button is in the lower left-hand corner, so you can use that button. And we also encourage you to use video, so you see that button there. If you've joined the meeting, and we'd love to know who you are, so you can open up your participant list and indicate who you are by renaming yourself there. Throughout the meeting, we also will only be using chat for kind of troubleshooting. So if you have any Zoom issues, please chat the host, which is Madeline Kane, or you can call or email her at the numbers that are up on the screen, and we'll put those in the chat as well for you. If you are in need of closed captioning, that's also available for today's meeting, and you can find that at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Just click on the CC button and select live transcript and then show subtitle. And then let's go to the next slide. So members of the public, thank you for joining today's live stream. And you probably noted that the link for today's live stream changed due to some technical complications. So thank you for joining on the new link. And we encourage you to go to the project website, which is oregontolling.org, and then click on regional mobility pricing to get all of the materials and information for today's workshop. So you'll have the agenda and other documents that were sent out to participants. You can also just use your smartphone to scan the QR code that's up here. There will be other opportunities to do that in today's meeting. So if you open up your phone app, whatever your camera is, snap a photo, you should get a link to the project website, and you can go to the project website that way, or you can just use the old-fashioned way, oregontolling.org, and click on regional mobility pricing. And as you know, this workshop is limited to invited elected officials and stakeholders so that we can really have a focused conversation with folks that are deeply engaged and have a direct link to the project through their agency or community organization. And we do plan for broader public engagement in 2022 and have had opportunities for public engagement earlier this year, and we really appreciate your participation. Throughout today's meeting, though, members of the public, you will be able to provide your input through an online survey, and we'll talk about that in just a second here. So here's the part where we want to hear from you and see who's in the room. So I'll introduce you to kind of our interactive input tools. So participants, if you are in the Zoom room right now, we encourage you to pull out your smartphones and open a browser right now. Just pull out your phone and do this now. And open up, Safari, Chrome, whatever browser you use, and enter menti.com. So go to that webpage, menti.com. And if you look in your chat, you will be given a code to enter when you go to Menti. So Gilly will go ahead and put that in the chat. And as workshop participants are doing that, we will also let members of the public know that at this time, we also encourage you to access our survey so that you can provide your input. So if you're a member of the public watching the live stream, please go to surveymonkey.com/ can you go back to the other slide for just a second so folks can see the SurveyMonkey? We can go to, can you go back to the other slide so we can see the SurveyMonkey? Thanks. So if you're watching the live stream, please go to surveymonkey.com/R/FB2N7PK and answer questions number 1 through 6 there. Those are some introductory questions. And you can also use your smartphone to just snap the QR code here to go to the SurveyMonkey. And you'll have similar questions to what we're about to ask workshop participants. Okay, so thanks. So now we can go to the Menti question. So folks that are in the workshop, you should have gotten a question about what part of the Portland metro region do you most connect with? And a lot of you have already answered. So where do you live, work, play? Might be more than one place. We just want to get a sense kind of geographically who's in the room. And if you're selecting other here, we encourage you to let us know where else you connect with in the chat. And that'll go to our hosts and co-hosts so that we can just get a sense of who is in the room. So thanks. It looks like we've got folks from well across the region. Thanks everyone for participating there. And then I think at this point, we could maybe go to our next question. We have 2 more questions, kind of just to warm up the room here. So if you're on your phone, you should have just gotten access to the next question here. So we want to know, what do you most want to get out of today's meeting? You know, do you want to learn more about the project because you feel like you don't know enough or don't have all the details? Do you want to really provide your input? Do you want to hear what others are saying? Is that most important to you, or something else? And if it's something else, feel free to pick other there and write that in the chat. All right. And it looks like a lot of you really want to hear from others and learn more about the project. So that is great. Okay. And then we just have one more question before I hand it over to Lucinda for a welcome here. So we want to get a sense of how much do you feel like you already know about the Oregon toll program and the effort to bring congestion pricing to I-5 and I-205? Do you feel very knowledgeable? You feel like you have all the information, somewhat knowledgeable, maybe not really very familiar, or you really feel like you don't know much at all? Okay, people are feeling like they know a bit, which is great. I think we'll have some basic information to kind of level the knowledge here, but also some new information. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you all today. Perfect. Okay, well, thank you for participating in those exercises. Let's go ahead and go back to the PowerPoint. And I'm going to introduce Lucinda Broussard, who is ODOT's Oregon Toll Program Director. So Lucinda, thank you for being with us today, and I'll hand it over to you for a brief welcome before we move into the rest of the agenda. And we can take it from slides now.
Thank you so much, appreciate it. I'm Lucinda Broussard, the Toll Program Director for ODOT in the Urban Mobility Office. I've been doing tolling for 20 plus years across the country. And I think that what you're here today about what we're doing is kind of the new challenge. So I want to welcome you all for joining us. I know this is going to be 3 hours, power-packed, lots of discussion. We appreciate you taking out the time to sit with us, because it is I know it's a long time. 3 hours on Zoom is really long, but I think you're gonna find it goes by pretty fast because it's very interactive. What we have today is a lot of different perspectives, and what we want to hear are all those perspectives. So we're going to ask that, you know what, we listen for the quiet people in the room and give them some opportunity and space to speak up. I think that you'll be surprised what you hear from each person. Today's workshop, we're introducing the Regional Mobility Pricing Project. It's a mouthful, I know, but you're going to hear about why the mouthful is so very important to this region. We're going to talk about it's interesting, it's complex, but it's not that new. And we'll get down to why the newness is not as new as we all think it is. So we're going to say, you know, sometimes this might be your first time hearing about the Regional Mobility Pricing Projects. Others might have seen us come around. We've been talking about it for about 6 months. So, you know, we might have come through your area already. You might hear some things you've already heard. I want to guarantee you that the information that you provide and that others provide will make this a very blossoming conversation. And I think you'll learn something new today. So we want it to be a discussion. This is not just a PowerPoint presentation we're doing for you. We expect that we want to have the discussion with you. We're going to talk about the why. Why are we doing this project? You know, we think that there's some real problems, right? We all talk about congestion as one of the big problems, but we also talk about the climate crisis, right? We talk about inequities in transportation. We talk about the stagnating quality of life. These are challenges of our times, and this is our time to kind of do something about that. And we believe we're stepping into that right now, and that you'll help us design what that looks like. Congestion pricing, tolling, coming to Portland. We're talking a lot of times about, as I said, we talk about it's new, it's different, first in the nation. The application of what we're doing for tolls is first in the nation, but tolling is not first in the nation. We have tolls down at Hood River and Cascade Locks. All across the country, you'll find tolls. Mostly in every major city, there is tolls. So it's not the new, tolls are not new. How we're applying tolls in this situation will be new. I think it's new. I think it addresses the things we're really concerned about, the climate, the inequities. I think that you'll find that this application is just different, but it's still tolling. And it actually has a nexus to what Metro Region's congestion pricing study looked at, and then what the Portland Bureau of Transportation, PBOT, looked at in through their poem, their equity group. And we're all talking about how to do this equitably better, modern, and actually building a system that sustains us through the future. We want it to be a success. We believe you want it to be a success. We want it to be equitable. We can't do it by ourselves. We need to all do it together. We're asking that you roll up your sleeves and you join in with us in making this work. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for spending the time with us today.
Thank you, Lucinda, for setting up that framing for today's meeting and kind of why we're here and what we're hoping to get with this workshop. Congestion information about centering equity in the project and what that looks like. You'll also hear about community engagement to date, kind of what's happened, what we've heard over the past few months and even several years. We're also going to have a panel with stories from across the nation. So people that have experienced congestion pricing and tolling in other parts of the nation, what did it look like to bring those programs into their communities? And you will also get a background on the purpose and need, which is kind of the first major decision for the congestion pricing effort. So a little bit of background there. And then we'll spend the second half of the meeting really in small group discussions on how can we meet the region's needs. So we'll have a number of topics there and we'll have you all break out into small groups so that we can really dive into that deeper conversation. And then we'll end the meeting with a little bit of next steps and how you can continue to stay engaged. And throughout the first part of today's agenda, we'll also have some opportunities for engagement through that Menti tool that you just used. So with that, just some discussion guidelines. We hope that you stay engaged and kind of maintain your curiosity throughout the meeting today. We hope that you are here to share your perspective and to hear from others. We heard that a lot of you really do want to hear from others. So, keep an open mind, let yourself be surprised. And when we get into those discussions, we will be looking to hear from everyone. So make sure you're stepping in to speak and also stepping back to hear from others. And we do have some breaks in today's agenda, but please take care of yourself in this virtual environment and do what you need to stay healthy today. So with that, I am going to hand it over to ODOT Director Chris Strickler to provide some history and context. So over to you.
All right, thank you, Sylvia. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for the confirmation, Sylvia. Let me start by saying I appreciate your attention and your input as we start down this path. I've got a little bit about history and kind of how we got here and maybe why this is such an important topic for us to talk about that I'll go through as we kind of pass through a few of these slides. But in my time this morning, I wanted to give that history and then also extend my appreciation, because one of the things that I found in my career is all things worth doing are a little bit difficult. And as you start to head down the path towards doing difficult things, our job is to create a space where we can have a two-way dialogue with those that we're working with, those that are impacted, those that are receiving benefit, all of those that are connected to the work that we do. It's really important. And it's been foundational in my career. I've been a public servant almost my entire career, and it's something that I continue to strive to do, and this is no different. Next slide. As we think about the history, I do want to really put some elements on the table. So one is we have a very diverse system. And I know many times ODOT is described as kind of a singular voice as it relates to roadways. And I will tell you that, yeah, we do have roadways, and we do manage roadways and facilities. But that's not all we do, and that's not all we are. And it's really important as we think about how we engage and how we tackle some of the problems that we have for our future, that we really are a diverse system in and of itself, not to mention as we expand our understanding and continue to have a dialogue about just the diversity of the state. Not every need across the state is consistent, and not every need across the state is exactly the way in one area of the state as it should be in another. And I think at times we've painted the universe with a consistency brush, and what we really need to be doing is having a two-way dialogue and get it right. Being right is more important than being consistent, and we need to make sure that we get that element right, and that's why we're having these conversations with you. Our system, like I said, is diverse. We, of course, include the interstate. We have urban arterials. We have a bike network that runs throughout the entire state and along down the coast is one of those prime examples. One of the first states to implement the EV West Coast Electric Highway. So we're doing a lot of things, and that's a product of really trying to balance those needs of not just today, but those needs that we see coming in the future. And again, that's really why we're here today. As we look at the things that we support, we support the economy. We also support individuals. So as we think about the state of Oregon, we're an exporter of many things: computer chips, forest products, ag products. Our region provides a lot of those things to the world. We also provide a strong intellectual capacity and a strong workforce in the many international companies that call Oregon home. It's essential to our economy that our transportation system really meets the needs of those individuals across the spectrum, right? So we're talking about every citizen and every person that resides in our great state. As we think about the traditional economic benefits supported by a state transportation system, we also have to consider we're also looking at the people. So we're looking at those discretionary trips that really make Oregon great. Oregon is one of the most beautiful states in the country. I've been to several states across the country, and there's a reason I live here. And I'm sure there's a reason why many of you live here as well, and I'm sure those reasons are actually fairly consistent. It's a beautiful place to be. It's a great place to recreate, and we really have great benefits within our state. And so we have to balance all of those needs as we think about the things that we have to accomplish with any program. Put simply, congestion is impacting all of those things for Oregonians. So it's impacting the economy, it's impacting people's lives, it's impacting people's quality of life. And as we think about a region that continues to grow, our system has to support the economy as opposed to holding it back. And we're using this moment to not just support the economy, but bring a sense of equity into a conversation that, frankly, from my perspective across our great country, maybe hasn't always done. And so we have an opportunity in front of us. And I'm excited about that opportunity, and that's why events such as this are so important. Next slide. So as we think about how we got here, and I mentioned all of the voices around the table, really in the how we got to House Bill 2017, which I'll talk about in just a minute, was no different. So the project we're discussing today is a culmination of a visioning process that was over 5 years in the making. As far back as 2015, our governor convened a transportation vision panel that was comprised of legislative representatives, business owners, civic leaders, and they held 11 forums across the state to hear from community members about what the transportation priorities and needs were. They found, not surprising for any of you on this call, that congestion on Portland highways impacts the economic competitiveness for the entire state. And let me say that again. Congestion in one area of our state is impacting the economic competitiveness of the entire state. At the same time, other state highways weren't designed or built to adequately move today's volumes of traffic. And so the panel recommended removing bottlenecks and addressing congestion in Portland, especially in the priority corridors of I-5 and 205. You'll hear a lot about that today. Increase investments in the freight network across the state, and provide more transportation options. And this is the other aspect that's absolutely important. We need to provide demand management strategies. We need to increase transit. We need to increase rideshare capacity, biking and walking, and employer incentives. No system is complete without a comprehensive approach to it, and that is what we are about. I've been privileged to sit in this chair for almost 2 years now, or right around the 2-year mark, and I can tell you that that has been our steadfast effort from the very beginning of my time here, which has been we really want to show up in a different way. We want to have the conversations that we need to have, and we want to create a system of the future that looks a little bit different than the system that we've had up till now. All of that work that I just described, it landed and led to the passage of House Bill 2017, a funding package that had bipartisan support. It articulated a comprehensive approach to managing the challenges of congestion in the Portland metro region, and it created opportunity for us to be having the conversation we're having today. But you see today, it's 2021, and that conversation was in 2017. Over the passage of time, or with the passage of time, we sometimes forget that there are distinct and integrated elements that we need to take into consideration as we continue down this path of managing the system. So significant investments in public transportation, increased funding for bike and ped infrastructure, as I mentioned before, improvements to our rail and port infrastructure, and then also key bottleneck fixes for the Portland region, which includes congestion pricing and one of the topics that, or the topic that we'll talk about today. We began moving on all of these fronts in 2017 immediately. The State Transportation Improvement Fund was initiated. It's the largest funding mechanism for enhancing public transportation across the state. We saw dramatic increases in funding for safe routes to school and for bike and pedestrian projects. We saw dedicated funds to off-system transportation in the form of Connect Oregon projects for ongoing stable commitment to future, and an ongoing and stable commitment to future Connect Oregon projects. Multiple projects across the state have already been completed as part of that package or are underway to support that efficient movement of freight and removing bottlenecks and improving some of those interchanges from the perspective of either safety impact or congestion-related impacts. And that's the other point that I want to bring to top of mind. A lot of the work that we're talking about right now and the congestion pricing program, which is part of an overall tolling program, is really aimed at creating a safer environment for those that are traveling on the system. All of you have been on the system in some way, shape, or form, whether you walked there, biked there, or drove there, and you've seen the inherent safety difficulties that we have. And so we have these tools that are available to us in the transportation sector. Congestion pricing is one of those, and we need to be looking at ways to employ that. Next slide. In late 2017, the value pricing feasibility analysis began. It was a 25-member policy advisory committee, and its charge was to determine, could congestion pricing help to address the problems identified by the governor's panel in 2015 and 2016. I'll spare you all of the details, but simply say after a year-long technical analysis and significant engagement, it became clear congestion pricing can both manage congestion and raise revenue to fund the future transportation investments. That doesn't mean it's expanding lanes everywhere across the system. What it means is we're looking at the opportunity to really address those bottleneck areas, those safety areas, and those areas that we have to create better connections for people so that we have a reliable system. Next slide. I didn't want to go into a description of the work that we're asking out of this group and the work that our team is working on without recognizing where we are and really the time that we're in. The importance of developing an equitable program is central to the mission of the toll program and our congestion pricing efforts. We have a panel that's coming up today where you hear more about the work that they've been doing and frankly what the efforts are that they have in front of us or we have in front of us. There's a clear recognition that transportation is Oregon's largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. Over 40% of the emissions in our state come from tailpipe emissions or vehicle fuels. The consequences of inaction on climate change have been painfully clear, and that's been clear for quite some time. Since 2016, the state has endured the worst fire events in its history, and those wildfire impacts, as you saw just a little over a year ago, impacted the entire state, having a much higher impact on low-income and other vulnerable Oregon households throughout its impact. 2021 temperatures hit 116 degrees in Portland. So you can see the significant impact there. So part of what we have to do as government, but then also in the questions that we're asking you to help us with is we have to, pardon the transportation fund, but we have to we have to bridge those gaps. We have to bridge the connections between creating a better space for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, creating programs that help us get there, while also introducing equity and economy and all of these other factors into it. If not us, then who is going to do this work? And so I submit to you that it is our job to do this work, and it's difficult, but these are the conversations that we have to have. In March of 2020, the governor signed an executive order really identifying how we're going to meet those goals of the GHG, or greenhouse gas reductions, and we initiated an ODOT Climate Office around that time as well. All of these things, again, are steps that we're taking as an agency to really better position ourselves to answer the questions that we know are out there and to position ourselves for a future that is coming at us very quickly. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the impacts associated with job loss, the impacts associated with the widening wealth gap, and then the overwhelming impact of a worldwide pandemic and what that has done to not just our ability to get work done, but boy, it's how we receive information, it's how we interact. I mean, this setting alone is a great example of that. But all of those things don't change the urgency behind what we are trying to accomplish and what we need to do. Our job is to look to the future and really address and have these conversations. So we're here and having this conversation because we feel that sense of urgency to move forward, to create opportunities, and really put in place tools that we haven't used before within the Oregon toll program and congestion pricing. The question before us right now is how will we do that? It's certainly not a question of whether or not it's urgent. That's pretty clear, and we need your help in getting to the how. So in just a little bit, our Urban Mobility Office Director, which is also a new office that we've established in the last two and a half years, Mr. Brendan Finn, he'll talk more specifically about the approach. And really what we're trying to do is look at all of these things in a comprehensive way. We don't want to take one project at a time, because one project at a time isn't going to address all of these issues. Looking at the system comprehensively is our best way to do that. Before we go there, though, I will pass it back to Sylvia. I want to thank you again as I'm passing it back to her. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your dedication and energy. And I want to appreciate all that you've done so far, because I know many of you have been involved for several years on some of these efforts and will continue to be into the future. So from me to you, I extend my appreciation, and I'm looking forward to the dialogue that I can participate in. I can't be here for the whole event today, but I do want to observe a little bit before I have to run off to some of my other meetings, and I do want to thank you for your participation. Sylvia?
Thank you so much, Director, for laying out that great history and context. And I want to point out that Della Mosier will be here in place of Brendan Finn today to provide some of that additional information as we move forward. And before we get there, thanks again, Director, for laying out some of those challenges that we're experiencing right now. And we know that for a lot of you, you have a lot of questions about the congestion pricing project, especially in light of those challenges. So we want to open up another question in the Menti. So if you are a workshop participant, again, pull out your phones, and hopefully you still have the Menti link in your browser, or just open up menti.com again and put in the code that's in the chat here. And we're going to open up another question, and live stream viewers, if you are in the SurveyMonkey, please go ahead and go to question number 7 so you can be answering the same question. So let's go to the Menti question. And here we just want to ask you an open-ended question. You know, what is your biggest concern or question about congestion pricing as we move in here? So just a few words or a question or a sentence to kind of capture your thoughts. And those will kind of be coming up on the screen as folks are submitting their key question, biggest concern. And hopefully we can answer some of this as we move into today's workshop. So I encourage you to just put in your ideas, and you can also submit more than once. If you submit your concern, you can do it over and over again to put all your top questions and concerns into the app. Yeah, so seeing a lot about cost, community, how will this impact communities, impacts to low income folks in the region. Questions about how will the public accept congestion pricing, that will be coming up in a panel discussion later today. Concern about toll-free options, definitely have been hearing that through some of the community engagement over the past few months. Concerns about diversion onto local streets. Seeing again questions about public acceptance, trying to solve really a global problem. Yeah, this is a big issue. How do we solve it on this local level? Concern about certain disadvantaged communities being impacted more than others. Questions about why other freeways aren't part of the project, such as I-84. Lack of options for those that don't have options other than to drive is a concern for sure. Great. Well, these are great. And you can continue to submit your biggest questions and concerns as we move into the next section. But for the sake of time, this is a really helpful list of what's top of mind to you. And we hope to cover a lot of this as we move into the next parts of the workshop. So we'll keep the Menti question open, but maybe take down the screen and go back to the PowerPoint. And I'm going to hand it over to Della Mosier to provide some information on, how does congestion pricing fit in the region and how will it work? So Della, over to you.
All right, thanks, Sylvia. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good deal. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Della Mosier, and I'm the Deputy Director of ODOT's Urban Mobility Office. It is my sincere pleasure to be here today with you, our partners, and our community to continue the conversation around congestion pricing in the Portland region. Next slide, please. I think, wow, the biggest concern or questions on the poll that we just saw, what are the costs, impacts to communities, diversion? I think solving global problems on the local level, those are all the biggest challenges of our day. And we at ODOT recognize that our world has changed based on a lot of these global problems and that we have problems that can't be addressed with just concrete and asphalt. To that end, ODOT launched the Urban Mobility Office, and that office has the charge to intentionally address the biggest challenges of our day. Challenges like a lot of the items you mentioned in the recent Menti poll. Things like inequity, which is caused by historic and systemic racism. Challenges like the climate crisis and global greenhouse gas emissions that are still rising. Challenges like congestion and the hours spent in stop and go traffic every week, whether you're in a car or riding on transit. And challenges like rising crash fatalities, particularly among pedestrians on our facilities. And finally, challenges funding a system that no longer pays for the investments we need to continue to grow. Next slide, please. So with all these global challenges and looking for local solutions, we know we cannot do this alone. And so we are asking you, our partners in our community, to bring your knowledge, your expertise, and your lived experience to join us in this once in a generation opportunity and help us implement a comprehensive approach to managing congestion in the Portland region. There is no way we can do this without you, and we absolutely need your help to get this right. Next slide, please. ODOT has been changing the way we do business by delivering major projects in the Portland region with a strategic and comprehensive approach. As you can see on the slide here, you can see the improvements to the ODOT system that the Urban Mobility Office is coordinating. And as you can see from the icons, they include a lot more than just concrete and asphalt. We want the next 40 years to include a transportation system that's beneficial for everyone, especially people that have been historically marginalized or excluded. Next slide. So considering all the problems that we have and that global perspective that we're trying to enact on this local level, what happens if we do not act? Well, congestion's definitely going to get worse. And that results in increased delays to our deliveries. It also means that access to employment is even more limited. And we end up spending more hours stuck in stop and go traffic. Travel becomes more unpredictable and less reliable. We end up adversely impacting our local communities by diverting traffic off the interstates and expanding gridlock on the local system. We continue to increase greenhouse gas emissions, and we end up with reduced safety investments for all modes of transportation. Next slide, please. Before we get into the details, let's just take a moment to clarify what we mean by tolls and what we mean by congestion pricing. All of you likely have experience paying tolls. There's toll roads, bridges, tunnels. There are 2 bridges east of Portland over the Columbia, the Bridge of the Gods and the Hood River Bridge, that are already tolled. A toll is simply a fee to use a facility. Congestion pricing comes in where we take a toll and we charge higher fees during peak hours. We change the rate of that toll depending on the demand. And that could happen during rush hour. And that helps encourage a small number of drivers to change their travel options, reducing congestion. Next slide, please. In general, most people pay for what we value. And we pay for it directly, like when we buy groceries at the grocery store, and sometimes indirectly, like how we spend our limited 24-hour allotment of time each day. As Director Strickler shared in his remarks, ODOT is inviting our partners in our community to help us shape a plan that will strike the correct balance between managing congestion and raising revenue. That balance that will improve our climate stewardship, safety on our highways, and will give you a reliable commute home, giving you back valuable time with your loved ones. As many of you know, congestion pricing is being used all over the world and in lots of places. And some benefits of congestion pricing that have been implemented in other parts of our country include personal benefits, such as a faster trip than what you're getting now, which means less time stuck in traffic. A reliable travel time. You'll have a better sense of how long your trip will take and will be better able to plan your day. Time back that you get to decide how to spend with families, doing athletics, hobbies, joining your community groups, and spending time with friends. And less time equals less gas, which means lower costs for you. There are also community benefits, such as using gas means reduced air pollution. Using less gas means reduced air pollution and lower greenhouse gas emissions. Another community benefit is sustainable funding for future projects so we can modernize our system in an equitable way. We need the sustainable funding to repair and upgrade bridges to ensure they can survive a Cascadia-sized event. We need sustainable funding to strategically address traffic bottlenecks on our highways. And we need sustainable funding to invest revenue for work off the highways to improve safety, mobility, and to enhance transportation equity. Congestion pricing is really about encouraging a small number of vehicles to choose different options. The changes in these options make the whole system more efficient, reliable, and safer, while reducing air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions at the same time. Again, finding these local solutions to address these global problems. Next slide, please. The Regional Mobility Pricing Project is a project to apply congestion pricing to the areas shown in blue on the map. The areas include I-5 from just south of the Interstate Bridge Project at the North Columbia Interchange, south to the Boone Bridge in Wilsonville, and I-205 from the Glenn Jackson Bridge to where it connects with I-5 in Tualatin. The toll rate is the tool we will use to manage congestion and raise revenue. If we set the toll rates too low and congestion isn't addressed, then we have no revenue for the future. And if we set the toll rates too high, then we can end up diverting vehicles off highways and onto local streets, which is not an outcome that we want. What we are looking for is that correct balance point in the middle where we generate revenue and manage congestion without moving all that congestion onto the local roads. Next slide, please. So how does modern tolling and congestion pricing work? I remember talking to my mom just in the last year, and she was asking me about toll plazas from her era. And so this slide would have been really helpful during those conversations. But as you can see here, all lanes would be priced. And so if you are on the I-5 or I-205 in the Portland area in the future, you would likely be paying a toll. The system would not include toll plazas with change boxes. It would be all electronic. There are no toll booths, no stopping, and no slowing down. Instead, there would be a transponder in your car, And one of the ones used for the Hood River Bridge are about the size of a Band-Aid. And you can see a photo of one here in the upper left-hand corner of the slide. That transponder would be connected to your online account. And if you don't have a transponder or an account, cameras will capture your license plate number and send you a bill, which you would then be able to pay online. Next slide. So we heard, how much is this going to cost and how much will tolls cost? And that's a really important question that's going to take all of us to help determine. At this time, we don't know the toll rates. The Regional Mobility Pricing Project is currently in the preliminary environmental phase of work. And so we're a couple of years out from completing that work and being ready to propose toll rates. The rates are really how we adjust the dials of congestion pricing. We will need to decide where are the tolls, what time of the day do we toll, and what vehicles will be tolled. We will need to adjust the tolls to create equitable access to the system, like using an income-based toll rate. In the end, a robust public process will inform the recommendation to the Oregon Transportation Commission, which will set the rates. And you will have an opportunity to provide input on the rates months before the commission sets those rates. Another fundamental tenet of this project is that you will only pay for what you use on parts of I-5 and I-205. So for example, if you're traveling from Wilsonville to Lake Oswego and you start on I-5 North, you exit to I-205 North, and then you exit at Stafford Road and continue on to Lake Oswego, you would have taken about a 12-mile trip. 7 of those miles would have been on the interstate, and you would pay for the usage of those 7 miles on the interstate facility, not the entire 12 miles. You would also not pay for I-5 through the Rose Quarter or I-205 through Oregon City on that trip. If that trip was during rush hour, or if you were driving a delivery truck, the cost could be higher. The tolls will not be a surprise. You'll be able to look them up online or in an app before you make your trip so that you can plan ahead. Next slide. So as many of you know, and many of our partners at Metro and PBOT are here today to join in this conversation, they've also been studying congestion pricing. And in these recent years, they've accomplished some really excellent work. In many ways, their findings align with ours, that congestion pricing really can help our region, as long as it's done right. And in their work, they have also highlighted some of the same primary concerns. Concerns about the potential for diversion from the highways onto local streets, which can slow down transit, as well as make streets more hostile for pedestrians and bicyclists. They're also concerned about our ability to provide transit and non-automobile transportation options and how we find reliable funding sources to invest in them. And we are all concerned about how congestion pricing will affect the least fortunate in our region. So I'll end with this call to action. Congestion pricing is coming to this region, and it will take all of us to make sure we get it right. And getting it right is really about doing it equitably. I'm going to now turn it over to Chris Lopez to talk about the work of our Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee and our equity framework for the toll projects. Chris?
Thank you so much, Della. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you, Chris.
Excellent. So I just want to say that it's a pleasure to be with you all today as one representative of a team of people working to advance equity as part of tolling at ODOT. About 2 years ago, I was invited by ODOT to help take Transform's approach to equitable congestion pricing and apply it to its I-5 and I-205 toll projects. For those of you that don't know, Transform is a nonprofit organization focused on advancing climate and equity in transportation and land use planning and policy. So, and at the time I was Transform's tolling and road pricing lead staffer and a contributor to the Pricing Roads Advancing Equity report and toolkit. And I've since moved on from Transform to start a firm called Mariposa Planning Solutions, which I started about a year ago. But what hasn't changed is in the shift from nonprofit advocacy, kind of working externally from public agencies to now consulting within public agencies, is my belief that a focus on equity advancement and congestion pricing plans and projects is key to ensuring equitable, kind of optimal outcomes overall, but also an essential ingredient to gaining public support, as evidenced by the state of concerns in the Menti poll earlier in the workshop. So if we can go to the next slide, the program developed the toll project's equity framework to provide a roadmap to help ensure tolling will lead to equitable outcomes and an intentional and equitable engagement process. So both outcomes as well as focus on process for the I-5 and I-205 toll projects. The program worked with a team of equity specialists to create the framework with input and ultimately approval from the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee, EMAC. A few key highlights of the framework include a commitment to minimizing burdens and maximizing benefits to communities that transportation projects have historically excluded and underserved. There are 4 dimensions of equity that include full participation, as mentioned, process equity, as well as outcomes, 3 outcomes: access to opportunity, community health, and affordability. There are also 7 organizing principles that emerged, including directly from EMAC input, which include incorporating a trauma-informed perspective, beginning with the racial analysis, and prioritizing input from historically excluded and underserved communities. Finally, as you can see here from in this slide, there's a 5-step iterative process, which I'll just sound off here, which includes identifying who, what, and where, defining equity outcomes and performance measures, determining benefits and burdens, choosing options that advance equity, and providing accountable feedback and evaluation, which doesn't stop once the project is constructed, but ongoing over the life of tolling. So if we move on to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about, in the next couple slides here, EMAC's relationship with ODOT and the OTC, which in some ways is unique, certainly for ODOT, as well as presumably for many other public agencies with projects like this. So since the framework was adopted over a year ago, EMAC, along with program staff, have been at work in translating the intent of the framework into action. One of the ways in which the program is unique is that EMAC reports and provides recommendations directly to the Oregon Transportation Commission, which is a toll setting authority. There are no other committees and no intermediaries in between. ODOT's role is really in assisting and supporting EMAC and identifying the actions and commitments needed to advance equity. So supporting and assisting EMAC. In May, EMAC came up with a draft set of preferred options, which include a specific a recommendation for specific dollars and percentage set aside for transit and multimodal investments from toll revenue. And if we go to the next slide, actually, I think it's the slide after that, if I'm not mistaken. In October, EMAC agreed upon a set of foundational principles that underpin an extensive set of draft policy and strategy recommendations. These principles will be presented to the OTC later this month with the intent to gain alignment with the OTC before the toll program moves forward with important steps in the months to come. So now moving on to the next slide, I'd like to introduce you to 2 members of the EMAC. These are volunteers that share their time and talents with us, not just during the EMAC meetings, but in many cases in subcommittee meetings and even periodic one-on-ones with program staff. They have been an essential ingredient of this effort, and we're very fortunate to have them, the 2 of them, here with us today to share their experience and perspective. So if I may, let's give a warm welcome to, in whatever way you prefer to express your gratitude, such as in the chat box, to our 2 members of EMAC here today, Kari Schlosshauer with the Safe Routes Partnership, and Dr. Philip Wu, retired physician from Kaiser Permanente and board member of the Oregon Environmental Council and Outside In. And Kari and Dr. Phil are going to speak to a couple questions here. One is, can you speak to the EMAC's foundational statements? We can maybe start off with that one. And what are your aspirations when it comes to implementing congestion pricing equitably, and what are the barriers? So I'll maybe kick it off to Kari first. If you'd like to introduce yourself, if there's anything else you'd like to say in terms of your role with this project, and if you'd like to speak to the EMAC foundational statements, which we had up on the slide a few minutes ago.
Great. Thanks, Chris, and thanks for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak. My name is Kari Schlosshauer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior policy manager with the Safe Routes Partnership. And yes, I sit on the EMAC as a member there. So you wanted to hear about the foundational statements. I think there was a slide that sort of outlined those. They're still being drafted and finalized, but I think what I'm really seeing in how this committee crafted those statements was a desire to really overcome some of the past trauma that's existed between the community and ODOT and the transportation system. There's a lot of distrust, quite honestly, that has happened around how projects have been built, where money has gone, and things along those lines. And I think I think I speak for the committee. I know I speak for myself when I say that we're really working to make sure that we are in alignment with ODOT and that we are in alignment with the OTC, so that when project decisions are made around tolling and how those funds will be spent and what our system could look like in the future and how that will positively benefit our communities and help to rebuild some of that trust, that alignment is in place, and that there's no question about that. So there's been a lot of work put into what we've done around putting those statements together and making sure that there is that alignment before anything else moves forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Kari. Philip, you want to add anything to the conversation?
I certainly would like to. And again, thanks very much for the introduction, Chris. And I am a retired pediatrician, excuse me, from Kaiser Permanente, so I bring a health perspective to all of this work. And I'm also the board president of the Oregon Environmental Council, so I'm deeply embedded in work that pertains to climate change and climate mitigation. So, I think building off of what Kari said, the whole notion of trauma-informed perspective is really important. I think it's one of the grounding principles of EMAC's work, which is we want to do things differently, and we are encouraging ODOT and the OTC to do the same, because we know that historically a lot of transportation decisions have been made without thinking specifically about the impacts on disadvantaged communities. And so that is where the quote trauma unquote comes in. So this time around, we don't want to make those same mistakes and to essentially re-traumatize communities that have already been subject to disproportionate impacts from previous programs and decisions. So the foundational statements, again, building off of what Kari said, are really an attempt to ground EMAC, but also ground the OTC and ODOT in a certain way of thinking, so that when specific actions get implemented, they are done so with that equity framework in mind. And so just as an example, we want to make sure that investments that come from the revenues that are generated, that there are in fact appropriate investments in alternative forms of transportation, so that those who either have to or choose to not use their automobile or their single occupancy vehicle, that they do have in fact appropriate options. And that these options actually have to be available right away, not 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years down the line after tolling has already been in place. That's typically kind of viewed as we're just going to slide this off sometime into the future, and who knows if those things will actually ever happen. So I think it's those kinds of fears that we want to make sure are dealt with at the very beginning, because that is what will help communities trust that this process will in fact unfold in an equitable way.
That's perfect. Thank you, Dr. Wu. I wanted to just a quick time check, Sylvia or anybody else with the team, just to make sure we're doing okay with time before we dive into the next set of questions. How are we doing?
We are running a little behind on time, so maybe a couple more minutes, and we have a packed agenda today, but this is a great conversation.
Okay, sounds good. So Kari, with that cue, if you want to tee up some of your aspirations when it comes to implementing congestion pricing equitably, and what barriers you see that need to be overcome.
Definitely. Yeah, I think Dr. Wu said it very well. I think, making sure that there are there are travel options in place as the toll program gets going, not afterwards, but on day one when that gets going. And there's about a third of the population of Oregon either cannot or does not, is unable to drive, and so making sure that there are those opportunities available, that we're not further burdening folks. I think about kids trying to get to school, folks who don't have safe routes to school right now, and there are not safe options, but they're still having to take them. Making sure that there's enough investment within this larger regional toll program to really build that system out, because that's not what has happened in the past, and people don't have the options they need to get around. I think that we hear that a lot in a lot of the comments that we hear as a committee from the public about concerns about diversion, about concerns about safety and air quality and so on. That's because the existing system doesn't provide those options. And so what I'm really seeing or hoping to see is that we can level that a bit, make sure that those projects get built, that there's good transit options for people, good walking and biking connections and things along those lines. But I think, again, barriers quickly are just making sure that everyday people's voices, the community's voices are being heard in a constructive way. The desire to reduce congestion does not necessarily mean that people need another lane to be able to drive more. They need more options that work for them, that get them to where they need to go safely and easily and conveniently, and at a price that doesn't break the bank. So I think there's a lot of concerns about how those voices are heard, and just again reiterating the history between the community and how many elements of the transportation system have been implemented. It's not positive, so there's a lot of trust building that needs to go on there. That takes time. That really moves at the speed of community and building those relationships, and that's going to take some time. And so a lot of work needs to be done there. Thanks.
Excellent. And Dr. Wu, you have 1 minute.
Okay. Well, I agree 100% with what Kari said, so I don't need to embellish or add on that. I guess I will say that from the barrier perspective, that one of the key things that we want to make sure happens is that there is transparency in all of the conversations and in all of the decision making that happens, because that is essential to this whole notion of trust building. And so if we're going to do things differently, if ODOT is going to do things differently, then transparency is really key to being able to demonstrate that, in fact, conversations and the information that's received and decisions are in fact transparent to everyone. And so it's difficult. That's a difficult thing to do if you are following an old paradigm of bureaucratic decision making. ODOT is a bureaucracy. Let's face it. And it takes a lot to move a bureaucracy in a different direction. EMAC is enthusiastic and looking forward to helping ODOT overcome some of those previous historical barriers.
Awesome. I think that wraps up our little portion of the agenda perfectly. Thank you, Dr. Wu. And thank you to both of you for taking the time out of your day to be with us again today. Let's have a little show of like happy hands or whatnot for their participation, everybody. Thank you so much. Sylvia, did you want to kind of pass on the baton to our next speaker, who I believe is Anne, right?
Yeah, that's right. So thank you so much, Chris, Kari, Dr. Wu, and to the entire Equity Mobility Advisory Committee for your great efforts. And we now want to move into talking about community engagement to date. So I'm going to hand it over to Anne Presentine to just go over kind of what's been heard, what's been done regarding community engagement. So Anne, over to you.
Thank you very much. Doing a time check, or not a time check, but a sound check. Can people hear me okay? Hoping so.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great, thanks. So I want to give you a little flavor about what we've been hearing recently in the community. So definitely teeing off of what Kari and Phil just said. And just to start us off, we had 6 equity discussion groups in the summer, and we have some reflections from the organizers here. And I'll have, I think, Madeline or Nick start the video.
People in my community don't think that adding toll will help reduce traffic. And most people don't want to have this tolling. So they don't like that idea that all lanes will be tolled. They would like to have options if it's possible.
The burdens that I heard from my community is if tolls is put in, what would be the effect of the toll, such as, are someone going to get arrested if they don't pay the toll fee? Are we going to have toll police? Like, am I going to get my car ticket? If I don't pay these tolls fine, or I can't afford the toll fine, what's going to happen? Where's the money going to go? Because there's going to be a lot of money that's going to be made off of these tolls. How is this going to affect the communities of color is our biggest concern.
Many of them expressed the concern about the rush hour traffic because they work, so they might not have the option to change the hour to avoid the tolling. And they curious about how the income bracket works. Is there any financial assistance?
We had a discussion group, and it was clear that nobody wants to pay for being on the road, but it was also clear that people also don't want to be in traffic. So everybody agreed on that. As long as we leave an option for people who cannot afford it to still use the freeway for free. Several people made comments that if 205, I-5, and other sections are told, that it would unfairly charge working people since they're the ones being in traffic during the rush hour, during the peak hours. So that was pointed out. The question was asked whether there will be specific and special programs for truck drivers. A lot of Russian, Ukrainian men, that's what they do. They drive truck.
The community where I spoke with, they are concerned about the fee, that it's going to be a big impact on them because some of them, they don't have enough money. Like during the pandemic, they're not working enough hours. So it's going to be a big impact on them. But if there is a way to have some financial support.
There was a conversation that occurred around making sure that those who utilize 205 and I-5 frequently and those who are low income paid a rate that was less than other folks. There were other conversations that occurred in terms of wanting to ensure that the funds collected from the tolling fees went back into infrastructure projects.
Thank you very much to all of our engagement liaisons. Okay, so let me step back just a little bit. And Sylvia, can you just give me a thumbs up that you can hear me? Okay, good, thanks. So to design a program that can work for our region, ODOT invited feedback from June to September on both the project purpose and need and to help us develop a pricing concept. The full results will soon be available on the website. We're just doing final editing of the report. But we had 3 significant engagement efforts. We had briefings with councils, committees, and community organizations, and many of you might have been a part of those. We had our discussion groups with historically excluded and underserved communities, and you just heard a little bit about that. And then we had a series of 5 simple online surveys that were distributed through social media and email. And this is just a reminder that a lot of this is qualitative data. People could opt into the survey, so the results are not representative of the region's population, but we did receive significant number of people who were engaged. And the findings and results do reflect what we heard in previous surveys in 2018 and 2020. So I'm going to share a few of the results. Next slide, please. Many participants in briefings, discussion groups, and surveys agree that traffic is a problem. And they also said that traffic hasn't changed much due to the pandemic. About 85% of survey respondents think traffic is a problem or somewhat of a problem on I-5 and I-205. About almost 70% of respondents report traveling on I-5 and I-205 about the same or more since March of 2020. Next slide, please. Significant numbers of survey respondents agree that traffic is getting worse. Traffic means more emissions and contributes to climate change, and it takes too long to get to work. More than half said it's not easy for people with low incomes, disabilities, and other barriers to get to where they need to go. I do want to highlight that climate change emerged as a key issue, with about 70% strongly or somewhat agreeing that vehicles stuck in traffic means more emissions. And only 4% said they didn't know if this was an issue. In previous surveys in 2018 and 2020 related to congestion pricing, climate change concerns were not frequently mentioned. Next slide. However, there are many questions that emerge from all the engagement efforts. People want to know about the need for transportation funding, how toll revenue will be used, and the potential tolling impacts, including financial impacts to drivers experiencing low incomes and the potential impacts of diversion. And this is especially true in comments we received from Clackamas County. Well more than 60% of survey respondents said they were unaware or disagreed that there's a lack of transportation funding. And more than half were unaware or disagree that congestion impacts freight. In discussion groups, we also heard from people who questioned whether tolling would actually provide a benefit. Next slide. Many survey respondents said they will avoid paying tolls and will change their routes or destinations to do so. About 3/4 said they would not likely pay a toll on a daily basis. And nearly 70% said they would not consider paying a toll to avoid stop and go traffic on local streets. Next slide. Finally, respondents want choices to pay or not pay a toll. There was support for a toll-free option, and respondents would consider paying a toll if it would save them 30 minutes of travel time. We also heard that people would consider frequenting a local business if they could avoid a toll. Only 30% of survey respondents said they would use transit if a trip would take 40 minutes or less. That's the end of my key findings. Again, the full results will soon be online, and we'll make sure that you get a link to it. There's a lot more detail in that. And now I'm going to turn it back to Sylvia.
Thank you, Anne, for that overview of what the team has been hearing from the public. And we know that many of you engage with your communities all the time and have been hearing from members of your community on tolling. So we want to hear what have you been hearing? So if you are in the workshop, please get your phone out and go back to the Menti in your browser and either put in the code or go to the next question. And if you're a live stream viewer, please go back to the survey and answer question number 9, which follows along with today's question, and we can move over to the Menti screen. And we want to hear, what concerns have you heard in your communities? So, you see on the screen here the top things that have been heard through the community engagement to date. So what have you been hearing? You can select as many as you've been hearing. So have you been hearing questions about how revenue will be spent, impacts on drivers experiencing low incomes, a desire for good toll-free options? Have you heard about concerns on impacts to the economy, diversion onto local streets, or just questions about will congestion pricing really lead to decreases in traffic? And if it's something else, feel free to put that in the chat so that our project team can be aware of that going forward. And we are due for a break here, so I think we'll just leave this Menti open for the next few minutes and take a quick stretch break while you respond here. Just in order to stay on schedule, we'll ask that you come back at 10:15. So feel free to, put yourself on mute, take a quick stretch break, and we'll get back together at 10:15 to get into our next topic. And if you haven't answered the Menti, go ahead and do that now. So let's take a quick break. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started again here. And I want to go back to the results from the Menti exercise that folks just participated in, because it's a really good entree into what we're about to talk about. So if you don't mind just pulling those up again. We're going to head into hearing about experiences of tolling and congestion pricing from across the nation. And, you know, it's looking like from the group here, diversion onto local streets has been a key concern, impacts on drivers experiencing low incomes, questions about how revenue will be spent is coming up in communities. And as we move into the panel, I think it's good to just keep this in mind, because in other parts of the country, these concerns have undoubtedly been raised too. So it would be helpful to hear how they've been addressed. So I'm going to hand it now over to Garrett Pryor at ODOT to lead us in a panel on stories of congestion pricing from across the nation. So let's go back to the PowerPoint and over to you, Garrett.
Yeah, definitely. And like you were saying, Sylvia, one of the things I've been working on is reaching out and figuring out what are those lessons learned from other places that have been through similar things. We know this is a big change and change can be tough. And so while this exact project hasn't been done before, tolling and congestion pricing has happened with success in other parts of the country. So today we're going to hear from a few folks. I've got a couple of questions for Lucinda Broussard, who before joining ODOT has 20 plus years of experience in managing electronic tolling systems in Atlanta, Georgia, and implementing Washington's Good to Go program that covered multiple projects in Washington state. David Ungema is a congestion pricing professional who has worked on 115 congestion pricing projects in 22 states. So much experience. He's also the past chair of the Transportation Research Board's Congestion Pricing Committee. And Brad Larson is joining us here just from a few states to the east. He's the Easy Pass Policy and Planning Manager at the Minnesota Department of Transportation. Today, he'll share his experience from the Minneapolis-St. Paul area's effort to adopt a managed lanes plan in 2010. So let's see, make sure everybody's there. Hi, Lucinda. And then Brad, and then we'll wait for David as well. Okay, excellent.
Well, I'm already here.
Awesome. So let's start our first question. And Brad, we'll go to you first on this. Wherever congestion pricing or tolling has been started, it faces public opposition. What has been your experience with people's reaction before and afterwards? So Brad, if you want to share a little bit about your experience in Minnesota.
Sure, thank you. And thank you for the invite here today. I want to commend Oregon for really taking a look at and pursuing this solution to a problem that all big metropolitan areas face around the country. So it's really really an interesting workshop here. I'm glad I got to participate. So we in Minnesota in the early 90s, we started looking at congestion pricing as a potential solution to congestion, mobility, safety issues we were seeing on our freeway system. And it was a solution that really showed a lot of potential. The particular form of congestion pricing we're looking at was high occupancy toll lanes. And it took a while to get implemented in our state. We didn't have any experience with tolling in Minnesota prior to looking at hot lanes. But we were able to implement them and open them in 2005, and really have had a successful experience with them. They work well from the outset, and they're still working today. And we continue to expand the system around our metro area. With that first project, we did a lot of before-after analysis, a lot of outreach to see what people thought of it before and after. As you might expect, there was a lot of concern about this solution in our area prior to it being implemented. Many of the same types of concerns you've seen raised here today. We tried to address a lot of those concerns as we designed the project, as we developed the implementation plan and the operations plan. And it went very well after implementation. Was it perfect? No. There were some things that were identified after we implemented that we had to address rather quickly, but we were prepared to do that. And when you take a look at the before-after outreach that we did, really a lot of the concerns people had beforehand didn't come to fruition. The vast majority of people, all demographics, really thought the project was working well. And so a lot of the fears that were out there prior to the project just were not realized after the project was implemented. I'll stop there.
Definitely. Thanks, Brett. David, do you want to pull out a story or highlight something from what you've seen in working on these projects and launching it and what the public's thought about that?
Sure. Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, I first have to mention that my very first project in congestion pricing was actually the one that Brad just mentioned. It was 1994, MnDOT in the metropolitan to look at congestion pricing. So it's nice to have that tie-in right there. To your point, though, to both Brad's and to yours, Garrett, that really what we have seen over time on congestion pricing related projects, and in the United States, we really have to talk about it as related. Primarily, as Brad had pointed out, they have been high occupancy toll lane and express lane type projects. where specific lanes within a freeway corridor are given access for payment of a toll that changes with the level of congestion within the lanes versus that of what are typically toll-free general purpose lanes. A broader application of congestion pricing, though, is really one that we haven't seen implemented in the United States. It's one that we look to international experiences in order to learn how those play out over time. Specifically, though, in terms of stories of how these evolved, and it's one that relates directly to the first project that I was involved with that led to implementation in Colorado on the I-25 express lanes. What we have noticed is a very definitive bell curve in terms of public approval, and it's kind of an inverse bell curve. We start off typically in the feasibility study process with having relatively high levels of public acceptance. It tends to go down, though. More and more public concerns evolve as more details about a project also come out. We see that right now with some of the commentary that was just provided in the video from members of the community. And as we start getting closer and closer to implementation, you start to actually hit the lowest level of public acceptance. A lot of fear comes into play because individuals can, they can see for themselves, they can visualize the payment of a toll. What they don't visualize is the actual reduction in traffic that happens because of the payment of that toll. Once we have seen an implementation afterwards, it does increase, and it increases substantially in terms of the level of public acceptance because that fear is no longer applicable. We now see that traffic has indeed been reduced. The payment of toll is really seen as a payment for service of that congestion-free trip, and public acceptance goes up with it. I saw that on I-25. I've seen that on other projects that have emerged since that time.
Yeah, definitely. So it's kind of the that the night is always darkest before the light piece. I think that's Spider-Man. But so we've got some harder places to go to next. Lucinda, what resonated with you is that bell curve. Have you seen that in some of your experience about how the public reacts to this or opinion?
I have actually, and I will harken back. There are a few things I think that we're talking about here that we hadn't talked about 5-10 years ago, which was equity. Right. I don't think that was really any concern when you're talking about what's the consternation of putting in a new project. Diversion, yes. Money, yes. Equity, no. So I would say that a new dawn has come, and that's where we are right now. But I'll give an example. Tacoma Narrows Bridge. It's going to be tolled. It's a new bridge coming. And I will tell you that for years, it was a fight. The day that it opened, there are headlines. Wonderful, no congestion. I can get home 20 minutes instead of waiting 20 minutes to get on the freeway to get myself home. So I will tell you that getting back time is just, it's kind of like that's the celebration in what we do, right? The quietness of what happens is that people can get where they need to go in time. So I'm hoping you have a further question here about equity and some of those things that we've been experiencing. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And like you're saying, Lucinda, people have to see it to believe it a little bit and experience that. So the next question I wanted to talk about are those areas, some of the concerns: diversion, climate, travel options on day one, income. If we could choose one of those out of the list, and maybe Brad, again, I'll start with you. I wonder, maybe even I'll give you your topic. I mean, I would love to know the travel options and how you've worked with transit and the combinations there in Minnesota. I found really interesting. So, maybe you could speak to that, or if there's another concern that you thought that you heard here that you all have addressed well in your work.
Yes, transit has been very important. From the outset, because our first project was the conversion of a high occupancy vehicle lane to a hot lane, there was a lot of concern that transit would no longer continue to have the same advantage that they had prior to the project, and so there was a lot of care taken to ensure that transit continued to have as good of an advantage on that facility as it did before the project, and to also enhance transit. We implemented new park and ride facilities, new transit stations. We added service and buses to the corridor to really enhance the overall transit option for people. We wanted to be able to not only provide that continued same advantage, but to enhance the service so that we could get more people to choose that option, that transit option on the system. And we continue to do that with all of our other projects. We continue to really try to be out there in front of them by enhancing transit facilities and service along those corridors, providing more opportunities for carpoolers to use the service, because in our lanes, anyone with 2 or more passengers can use the lanes for free. And I think that's very important. And we also, our statutes and how we use revenue get a little complicated, but essentially, after we pay for operations, any revenue that exists after paying for operations gets split between MnDOT and the transit agencies in our metro area for both highway and transit improvements within the corridor from which the money was generated. So,
yeah, excellent. Thank you, Brett. David, so removing the transportation options concern, what's another concern that you've felt or you heard today that you've seen addressed well other places?
Yeah, absolutely. So, some attention to climate and what we need to do in order to really address which are very longstanding and very alarming conditions with climate change. Congestion pricing certainly has its role in providing some level of balance back in terms of one of the main emitters into our climate change, which is our mobile, our vehicles. Where congestion pricing has a role is that it, one, helps reduce overall vehicle miles traveled within a system. As all those individuals who are trying to find alternative routes to heavily congested roadways come back to those now congestion-free roadways and find their pathways to transit and other options for travel, all those together have an effect of reducing VMT, and that in turn helps us with reducing mobile emissions. But then secondly, it also provides a context for thinking about the long-term sustainability of our infrastructure and our services. Infrastructure from a surface transportation perspective, we tend to think of it as build and forget, right? We build the roadway and then forget about it and let just everyone use it without any constraints upon their use. Congestion pricing is actually a means of providing order back to that use in ways that helps regulate the overuse of it. And by regulating that overuse, we can then restore some of the functionality at the same time as reduce the emissions that help our climate overall. It's one of the most powerful tools I can think of that can really encourage greater use of multimodal transportation and reduce individual vehicles from needless contribution to emissions.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because you as well kind of tied in the diversion aspect of it. And just real quickly, if you want to add on to that, so what we have seen is it doesn't lead to the continual gridlock of local streets. Like, people do get back on the highway and that smooths out, right?
Absolutely. Don't want to get too geeky on this, but when you think of a congested, saturated corridor, you are not moving as much vehicles as that corridor can carry. And so as a result, all this traffic that is built up is not moving on the freeway, and it's also being pushed out right now onto the local streets. There's diversion happening every day, every minute, because of congestion in the Portland region. But when congestion pricing helps free up that capacity on the highway, it actually opens up the ability to carry it back to what it was designed to carry. And that means that vehicles actually come off of the local streets and back onto the freeway as congestion pricing does its job. It's counterintuitive, but we've seen it time and again, not only in the United States on express lane facilities, but also that of cordon-based pricing systems that are found elsewhere in Europe and Asia.
Excellent. So just a minute and a half or so here, Lucinda, do you want to solve impacts to low income? No, I'm just kidding. Was there a concern that you wanted to talk about? Yeah, or others? Yeah.
I would say the anecdotal is that for equity, for sure, is that we're learning it now. There is a long stream of studies that have just been about communities that have been impacted after we've already developed and put in the roads. And I think now we're trying to get on the front end of it versus the back end of it. So our lessons learned here are that we are trying to be in the forefront of what equity looks like for toll programs versus the back end of it, which is what our lesson learned is. So that's my history piece on that one.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that there are very few, if not any, that I've seen that have income-based toll rates. So we'll be a leader in that as well, or kind of at the forefront of where those are at. Yeah, go ahead.
LA Metro has a program. So they do have a program for income-based toll. And it ties into kind of transit, right? Where transit has many different fares. So it's kind of taking that step. LA Metro in their transit program is actually using it for their tolling program. So they do have that step. We're not there yet, right? Yep. We don't have the transit. We're not transit and transportation. We are just roadway. We are not transit in both. So it'll be a different application, but we are looking to use it for sure.
Definitely plenty to walk through. Well, thank you all for just spending a few minutes here. I thought that was really excellent to kind of get us a view of the tolling future and past. I'm thinking of the 3 Christmas ghosts there. So that was excellent. Sylvia, I'm going to transition it back over to you.
Thank you, Garrett, and thank you to all the panelists for sharing your stories from your experiences in the past. I'm going to hand it over to Josh Channel now to walk through kind of the first major decision for the congestion pricing project, which is the purpose and need. And this will kind of dive into our breakout room discussions that we'll be having in just a minute. So Josh, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Josh Channel. I lead the planning and technical team that's doing the analysis on this. And today I'm going to tee up what we're going to talk about in the breakout groups, which come up next. You've heard a lot of the history of how we got here. Over the next 6 months or so, we really want to nail down some of the specifics, working with you and other stakeholders. The first thing, we think this project has the potential to really improve our region. You've heard that again and again. But first, we really want to make sure we're on the same page for what we're actually hoping to improve. So what specifically are we asking you to react to? At the end of July, we published a discussion draft purpose and need. A purpose and need statement is done for all projects that involve federal dollars or federal facilities, in this case, the interstate highway system. And the title says it all. This is our justification, trying to answer the question of what's this project for and why are we doing it? So we're asking for comments on this. It's been out since July. We're asking for comments between now and a week from tomorrow. But we'll also use any input you give us today. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so let's start with the purpose. Trying to be really specific and clear with this. It's a single sentence. We are intending to or proposing to implement congestion pricing on I-5 and I-205 in Oregon, in the Portland region, for 2 reasons: to manage traffic congestion and to generate revenue for future transportation projects. So any version of the project has to meet these dual goals, and the statement also limits what the project is. We're not proposing a new highway. We're not proposing a gondola connection to downtown. We're being very specific that this is about congestion pricing. Next slide. Okay, so next, following the purpose statement in the document, there are 6 need statements. They are equal in importance, but today we're going to number them for simplicity. We could present them in any order. I'll go quickly through the 6 statements, and then we will split into the discussion groups, which will be the majority of the rest of our workshop. So issue number 1, daily traffic congestion is negatively affecting quality of life in a growing region. So many hours wasted in traffic, it's going to get worse. The region's growing really quickly. A lot more people are projected to live here. There's going to be a lot more jobs. This means more vehicles on the road, more vehicle miles traveled, and more time spent in those vehicles unless we make some changes. ODOT calculates that if we don't act, by 2040, every household is going to spend an average of 3 days stuck in congestion every year. It doesn't sound real nice. This, of course, has a really personal effect as well. This is time that you could be spent with your family, working out, playing a sport, earning some extra income, getting to another job site, but it also has tremendous impacts for community quality of life. It means that there's a lot of vehicles that are exiting our highways right now, diverting through local streets. People trying to travel at highway speeds on local streets makes them unsafe. When a lot of vehicles do it, it turns into gridlock. And until all of the vehicles are electric, it means terrible implications for air quality and greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. Traffic congestion is also slowing down economic growth. I think we all know the importance of the highways and transit and our roads and ports for our economy. Traffic congestion is holding this back. Traffic volumes have bounced back pretty quickly after the initial lockdowns of COVID. I'm sure many people have been stuck in traffic jams lately, but traffic is back to where it was pre-pandemic. This congestion means that we can't predictably get people to work on time. Contractors can't get to job sites. We can't move products where they need to go when they need to get there. Traffic congestion is making it more expensive for everyone, an estimated $2 million in lost productivity every day. Next slide. Director Strickler noted transportation emissions are the largest source of emissions in the state. Our transportation system must reduce greenhouse gas emissions by managing congestion. In our need statement, it says clearly what we think needs to happen to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We must reduce the number of hours vehicles spend stuck in traffic, the amount of stop and go traffic, and the number of miles vehicles are traveling. Next slide. The number 4, the Portland metropolitan area's transportation networks have resulted in inequitable outcomes for historically and currently excluded and underserved communities. We had a panel on this earlier. This is a photo behind the text here of the construction of I-5 through the historic Albina neighborhood, almost destroying it. These injustices are not just history, they have implications for how our system works now and how equitably it is now and how well it delivers to the people that live here. When we are proposing congestion pricing, we're being very deliberate to make sure that we're not causing new trauma, but also that our system moves towards being more equitable. That's fundamental to the DNA of the work that we're doing. Next slide. Our transportation system must support multimodal travel to reduce congestion. People need better travel options if we want them to consider different ways of traveling to reduce congestion. Effective transit, complete networks for pedestrians and bicycles, safe connections to transit stops are always people can get toll-free to a destination. A effective multimodal transportation system is an essential complement to a tolled highway system. Finally, on revenues from gas tax are not sufficient to fund transportation infrastructure needs. The federal gas tax, 18.3 cents per gallon, has not been raised in 28 years. In 1993, 2 trends have conspired to make this worth much less, this 18 cents. Construction costs adjusted for inflation are up 170%. Vehicles have gotten 26% more efficient. That's a good thing, but it means that overall there's less revenue while there is a greater toll, no pun intended, on our roads from the number of vehicles and the amount of economy that it's supporting. Overall, the Institute for Taxation and Economic Policy has estimated that the value of our gas taxes have dropped by 71% since 1993, since they were last raised. What does that mean locally? It means in Oregon, we have a shortfall of $500 million every year just to meet our basic maintenance and operations for bridges and highways and pavement. So please give us your comments. We'll do this a little bit in the breakout groups. There's a link here. There is a QR code that you can take for a screenshot. It's on the website. So we look forward to hearing your thoughts on these need statements. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Sylvia to give us our instructions. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Josh. Yeah, so in a moment, we're going to get into our breakout rooms. And if you go to the next slide, we have some instructions here. So members of the public will be in breakout rooms for about 45-50 minutes here. So during that time, we invite you to go to the SurveyMonkey and answer a couple of questions on the purpose and need on questions number 10 and 11. So you can follow along and provide your input there and take a longer break. And in our breakout rooms, participants will be invited to answer some questions around these need statements. So namely on managing congestion and generating revenue. And we'll also see where the group wants to go on questions related to equity, climate change, and supporting transit and multimodal options. In our breakout rooms, we'll have a facilitator and a note taker and kind of a sticky note board. And ODOT staff will be in some of the rooms to listen in. And this is really meant to be a conversation, not a Q&A session. So we do hope that we can kind of have a conversation and hear from folks rather than spending time answering questions. And we want to hear from you, and we hope that you hear from each other. That's really the purpose of these discussions. And going forward, your input will help with development of project deliverables moving forward. And in your breakout rooms, if you're not able to make it into your breakout room or you need help, Madeline Kane will be staying in this main room to help direct you to where we go. And when we get back into the main room, facilitators will do about a 2-minute report out on some of the few key points. And we'll also hope to have time for a few reflections from this group in the large group discussion. So we'll ask you to raise your hand and weigh in when we get back as a large group. So members of the public, again, kind of invited to answer questions 10 and 11 in the SurveyMonkey, and we'll be back in the large group at 11:30. And participants, in a moment, you're going to get a blue button on your screen that says join. So you can click that to get into your breakout room. And Madeline Kane, you can go ahead and do the magic to break us into these breakout rooms. But just want to check, anyone from project team want to weigh in before we do that? Right. Okay, then let's go ahead and get into our breakout rooms for about 45 minutes here. We'll resume at 11:30. We'll see you all in the main room shortly.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I think we've got everyone back in the room. Okay, well, I know we had a great conversation in the breakout room that I was able to be a part of. And so we just want to do some quick report outs, and I was in room 1. So I will go first, and then I believe Ann Presentine will go, and then Chris Lepe, just some brief report outs from the breakout rooms. So in our room, we had a really good conversation on managing congestion, revenue generation, and on the topic of equity. And in terms of congestion, really, I think people responded to that, to what was said earlier in the panel on stories of across the nation, that diversion, is always a major concern, but over the long term, there aren't always lasting diversion impacts. And so, but it will still be really important to manage and address the public concerns around diversion in the short term, and that there's already diversion happening due to highway traffic. So that was kind of something we talked about for a while. There was also a concern that, moving traffic off the highways would, of course, lead to local impacts and impacts on local plans that jurisdictions have already set up. So, will the local communities be able to handle the changes that come with congestion pricing? That kind of needs to be taken into account. We talked a bit about revenue, and there were questions about revenue flow between the states. So, impacts on Washington state and revenue flow between Washington and Oregon. And we asked the question around what kind of investments would really make your community more supportive of congestion pricing. And it really came down to transit operations. That was a really big one, as well as other kind of bike and walking and other systemic changes. But of course, there was conversation around what kind of off-highway projects can actually be funded due to constitutional constraints, and what kind of transit operations can be funded. We talked about equity and talked about what kinds of groups might need to be supported by the congestion pricing program other than low-income drivers, and talked a little bit about rural drivers, those that are outside of Portland and coming in, especially that are working or lower income and coming in from out of the metro region. Also, what are the impacts to the industry, especially those out-of-state industries. And we talked a bit about, some people have chosen to live far away from where they work, or maybe not chosen, and they will be impacted a lot by this program. So how do we manage that? Do we expect a behavior change, or do we put something in to support people that are commuting really long distances? And I think overall, there was just conversation around the need to publicly message what is really the intent of congestion pricing and the other tolling projects in the region, and to make sure the public, there isn't confusion, and that people understand what congestion pricing is trying to do, what the other tolling efforts are trying to do across the region. So that's my high level report out. And I'm going to hand it over to Ann, and let's just take down the slides for a moment here.
Hi, everyone. We had a great discussion as well, and just a few things to bring up. We had quite a discussion on just the need to set the tolls right and have that balance, but that there's really a benefit just to getting the highway working. It will get the capacity up, and people will make choices. Just is it worth it to them to be able to have a predictable trip, and that is a benefit for the whole system. So similar to, I think, what I've heard Lucinda say many times, and also what David Engelma was saying. There was also discussion about just the real need to provide options and choices for people, that's really going to be an essential part of a tolling system. We had the question on, what happens if we get this not right? And the group very quickly said, this will be really bad if we don't get it right. It's really incumbent on us to do it. The region will reject it. So we really do all need to get it right. The other thing that we had was just really kind of this chicken and egg, where in order to reduce congestion, we need to have the options. In order to have the options, we're going to need to have revenue. What do you do first? And it's hard to decide what to do first. So, those are just a few things that came out from my group. It was an excellent conversation.
Thank you, Anne. And Chris Lepe?
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Hey, hey. So yeah, we had our reporter. It was our gonna report out for us. Thought we had a reporter.
I think you get to be the reporter, Chris.
Oh, I thought we had a reporter. I don't have the notes in front of me here. Sorry about that.
Sylvia, I can chime in here with a few themes from our
Thank you.
group. Yep, no problem. Let me just pull that up. So in talking about managing congestion, we had a number of participants from the Clark County area. So it came up concern about the commute from Clark County, as well as one of the participants manages different transportation providers, and especially for medical transportation. So just getting it right for what's the impact on cost to them, and how you can continue access to the most vulnerable. Really an interest in empowering local communities to be part of the conversation. We also have participants from Clackamas area who had many local community members concerned about diversion. And something that came up a few times is that quality of life really resonates in terms of managing congestion and providing those other options like biking or transit. And then for what happens if we don't get it right, concern about economic impacts, losing business, people find other ways to get to where they need to go, and losing trust was really a common theme, not only among ODOT, but among other agencies, and how that would affect other agencies to move forward with similar projects. And then just what happens if traffic isn't able to move, and the impacts of diversion. And then for the generating revenue discussion, there was a lot of conversation around interest in Clark County for capacity expansion to really help with moving traffic, and a smaller segment of the population interested in some new multimodal investments. And in Clackamas County, they want to see a new bridge and providing more lanes and capacity. And there's some concern that funding would go to transit or rail rather than roadway improvements and capacity increases. And finally, on the higher tolls or keep it limited discussion, many supported keeping the toll rate higher, at least to start, to help meet project goals, but there was an alternative perspective to keep it low to begin with. So I think that those were the themes of our discussion.
Great, thank you, Kirsten. And one more report out from our fourth breakout room. Nicole, were you able to provide a few key themes?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we had a great discussion too. And I mean, heard similar things to what the other groups have reported out. We mainly just talked about the managing congestion and revenue generation, a robust conversation around those two. So we didn't get to some of the other topics. But on the managing congestion, really there should be a measurable difference immediately that will help build support and for success for the project. And also a lot of discussion about not just shifting, trips to the local system, that managing congestion on the highway just shifts trips. It doesn't actually, it's not going to be solving the problem. And there was a comment about that needing to maybe be more reflected in the purpose statement as well. And also addressing the needs of the middle class, the working class, that may not be able to shift their time of travel. So that, of course, has come up at other times today too. And then as far as the consequences, safety being an issue, diversion onto local streets, if we don't get it right, there's real safety implications across the region. And then on revenue generation quickly, there should be investment in all modes, and not just highway improvements, and also an idea of cash transfers to local residents. So actually giving cash up front annually to local residents to offset potential cost of tolls. And then one point about the second question about charging higher tolls, it was noted that that question is framed in a way that makes it sound like non-highway projects are kind of extra. And so to be careful about how that question is asked, that, tolls should be, ODOT should charge an appropriate amount to create a holistic, comprehensive system. So it's, alternate non-highway projects are not necessarily considered extra, and that should be considered in the way that question is asked. So those were some key points from our group.
Okay, thank you, Nicole, and everyone. Appreciate all the conversations in the breakout room. And we also just want to hear from participants today. Do you have any additional reflections from your breakout rooms? Anything that stood out to you or anything you want to bring to the main group here? We'd invite you to raise your hand. And if you want to pull up that slide, I think we're all Zoom experts now, but if you don't know where the raise your hand button is, if you just hover over your screen and see the reactions at the very bottom there, click on that and you can find a raise your hand button. So we would encourage anyone that just wants to make any kind of final reflections on what you heard in the breakout rooms or your observations that you want to share on congestion pricing. Just encourage you to raise your hand and make your thoughts known here. Right. Okay, we have a couple of first brave souls here. So I'll go to Andrew and then Gerard, and please feel free to introduce yourself, say kind of where you're coming from when you speak. So we can take down the slides now, and Andrew, over to you.
All right, my name is Andrew Labonte, and I've got to apologize. I just lost my train of thought, so give me a moment here. Let me get back at it.
Yeah, how about let's go to Gerard first, then we'll get back to you.
One of the reflections I had was that we need to emphasize to the public the different ways in which they can respond to congestion pricing. And I think there's at least 4, right? Change the route that you take, change the mode that you take, adjust the hours in which you're using the road, and ultimately, very expensive, change location. I think we sometimes forget that during rush hour, over half the people on the highway are doing it for a non-work purpose. May be important, but it's not going to be constrained so much by the workplace. So I think that that we have to recognize that people make very complex choices, and that and that there are at least 4 different ways in which you can modify your behavior to avoid paying the very highest toll during rush hour.
Yeah, thanks, Gerard. And Andrew.
Sure, thank you. And my question was regarding the diversion. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did I hear that typically the diversion increases at the beginning of these projects and then over time decreases as the highway clears up? Is this something that is, what types of studies maybe can we look at for that information, or is that, how real is that? So when I go back to the folks in Gladstone, when they talk about the diversion issue, how does that work? At what point does it kind of clear, if for lack of a better term, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know, David Ungama, you were able to speak on this a little bit earlier. Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. The first is there might have been some conflation between the concepts of public acceptance, which has that inverse bell curve, when once you're open, you start to see an increase in the level of public acceptance for the facilities, with the concept of diversion. So diversion, some of that aspect does happen. What ultimately happens, though, is more of a balancing across the entire system. So right now with congestion, you get a lot of diversion of trips because the freeway facilities are heavily congested. With a little bit of extra attention with the congestion pricing, you have a reduction in the level of diversion due to congestion, with an increase actually in the level of throughput that the freeway facilities carry as a result of pricing. So in the longer term, all those factors balance out against each other. So you will see some trips return to arterials, you see some trips return to the freeway, you'll see some move off as well. But the part that remains is the is the higher throughput level on the freeways because they are priced, so that way you get a little bit extra trips coming back to the freeway over time than you would with just, you know, ambient levels of traffic growth. And I don't know if that helps answer the question. The express lanes concept is the one where we see the most of this evidence over time. And so there are some differences about how it would be applied, but to Lucinda's point earlier, we are still talking about largely variations upon tolling and where those concepts come from a lessons learned and experiences perspective.
Thank you, David and Andrew. Okay, others, any other kind of final reflections or things you want to say to each other about congestion pricing and on I-5 and I-205? Yeah, Catherine.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. Two pieces of conversation we had in our breakout room that I think were pretty important. One is, and they're both related to public acceptance, essentially, of the program. One is reminding the public that HB 2017 included capital projects, so there will be projects delivered. And that's, in relative terms, that's a near-term delivery, but the revenue, the tolling will not go away when those projects are delivered. And so is there room at the legislative level for conversation about longer term use and prioritization of the revenue? So I think that that's a helpful messaging with the public. And secondly, another piece we talked about, which has also bled into is nomenclature and terminology. And in general, I think the public understands tolling. They know what tolling is. They've heard congestion pricing, but when we're talking about this program and other programs within the region or by state area, is there a way to have consistent messaging and nomenclature so that the public just understands more clearly?
Thank you, Catherine. Well, thanks. Appreciate everyone's reflections here. I think as we head into the last part of our workshop here, we want to do a few more interactive activities with the group. So we're going to pull up the Menti again. So if you have your phones, go ahead and go back to that Menti app and put in the Menti code that's in the chat. And if you're watching via live stream, go back to the public survey. And we're going to ask a question, if you can pull up the Menti screen here, around kind of, you know, after you've heard everything today, we want you to think about 3 words that would really describe an ideal transportation system, especially, you know, an I-5, I-205, the corridors that will be impacted. What are the 3 words that would really describe that for you after the benefit of today's conversation? And we'll give you a second to put that into your platform here, and hopefully we'll have some ideas popping up in just a second. Okay, yeah, so saying that people want a safe, efficient, and equitable transportation system. That's definitely coming through here. Also a focus on multimodal options, accessibility, options again, reliability. All right. Maybe give us another second here and then we'll get into our next question. Okay, so let's go to our next question now. Thanks for participating in that. And these are just sort of reflections now that we have had the benefit of today's conversation. We want to go back to, at the top of the meeting, we asked you kind of your top question or concern about the congestion pricing project. And so we want to ask you, what remains for you? What is your main top question or concern now after you've been in a workshop for 3 hours on the topic? So again, go to Menti and hopefully the question will be up there for you. And if you're on the Survey Monkey, you can answer questions number 12 and 13 to finish out our workshop today. So let's pull up the Menti, and we want to hear, what top question do you have that we didn't get to today? So go ahead and just put in, what were you wishing to hear about today that didn't get answered, or maybe more questions came up for you from your conversations. Okay, so question about, how does the recently passed federal transportation bill affect the program and funding needs in Oregon? Other congestion reduction efforts in the region. Again, impact of the federal infrastructure legislation. Big questions here. Want to know about the fee and how much it will cost, timing for implementation. How could revenue be used for modes other than driving? Kind of what will the impacts on local roads be and which local roads would be impacted? A lot of question about rates and how much this will cost, or how the rate will be set and kind of what money will go towards. All right, that's great. And then let's just get into our last question for today on the next Menti slide here. So now that we've had the workshop, we just want to know, how much do you feel like you know about the Oregon Toll Program at this point? At the beginning of the meeting, most of you said you felt like you were very not knowledgeable, somewhat knowledgeable, really felt like you knew a lot. So just want to see, did you learn something? Are you feeling like more like you know more about the program after the benefit of the conversation today? It's looking like a lot of you are feeling very knowledgeable. So hopefully today helped a bit to get some level of understanding. All right, well, those are all of our Menti questions for now. So let's maybe head back into the PowerPoint, and thanks everyone for participating in that. We want to get into just a little bit of a wrap up and closing and talk about next steps for you to stay engaged. And before I get into kind of those next steps, I just want to hand it over to Lucinda Broussard for a couple of minutes for just a brief closing and thank you for the group.
So thank you, Sylvia. Thank you. As I said in the beginning, it was going to be 3 hours and we were going to have a discussion, and I think we achieved that. I kind of took some notes as we were going along, and I think we started out with the why. Why are we doing this project? And then Chris, Director Strickler, came on and he said the how. And then we went through the what with the workshop, with the breakout rooms. And here's kind of what I heard. So I just wrote down some of the things because every breakout room had something different. So I tried to, just as we're all talking, just write down things. What should we do first when we're talking about congestion pricing? Like, what should we do first? How do we do this, and what should we do first? All about transit, and there was many things about transit nomenclature. How do we talk about congestion pricing versus tolling? Setting the toll rate right, making sure that we have the toll rate set right. We talked about high and low. We talked about, it's kind of the high, low, what happens if it's not working. I'm going to say equity and roll it into, I heard about rural, making sure that we take into consideration people in rural Oregon, middle class, lower class. Local resident credits was something else I heard. Diversion, and I think we talked about diversion in all ways. And then there was the little outbreak conversation where David gave a little bit more information about how diversion can come back to the highways if they're moving properly. Options and choices, and I'll roll that into not just transit, right? We talked about ped, bike, so other options and choices. And I think I heard modified behavior, 4 changes: route, mode, adjust the time, and then your location. Economic impact, What does that look like? Losing trust. How do we keep? I mean, it's like the balance, right? Of I think it was Dr. Wu commented that ODOT was a bureaucracy. Trust doesn't really go with bureaucracies well, but we're talking about how do we gain trust and then how do we keep it? The conversation about losing trust by state, the concerns between Washington and Oregon, and then safety, investing in all modes. And then I would say that this kind of all culminated into that last Minty when there were 4 things that we talked about: reliable, safe, efficient, equitable. I think we hit all of those with all of this. So I want to say thank you for the 3 hours that you've spent with us. I can't do it without you. I can honestly say that is what this is about, that we cannot do it without you. So we need all of your input to get an output that we can consider successful. So thank you again for joining us. Really do appreciate it. Thank you, Sylvia.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Lucinda, and everyone who participated today. Just a couple more slides on our next steps. What comes next? How can you continue to stay engaged? And so next up, the project team will be refining the draft purpose and needs statement and developing congestion pricing concept and policy options. And there will be continued public and stakeholder engagement in the winter of 2022. And we did provide a fact sheet in kind of your packet that has all the different ways to stay engaged and the websites and the social media links to follow. So we hope that you can look at that and look at the ways that you can stay engaged. And of course, all the most relevant information is going to be on OregonTolling.org. And then next slide, we do want to know, how did this workshop go for you? We have an evaluation form, and you can use your phone to kind of click on this QR code here, or you can go to the SurveyMonkey, and let's put that in the chat as well, surveymonkey.com/R/F3XH3Z6. Or visit the QR code just to tell us, how did this go for you? And do you have any other remaining questions that we didn't get to, so that we can improve when we do another round of workshops, which we hope to do in kind of spring of 2022 to continue to engage you and others in the community. And then on the next slide, just continue to follow along OregonTolling.org, or follow the Urban Mobility Office on Twitter. And I think on the next couple of slides, we just have contact information for Lucinda and Garrett, which is also on the website. So reach out if you have questions. And we really appreciate all of your time and energy today, and look forward to your continued engagement as we move forward. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.